Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 14th installment of the Senior Leadership Insights series, sponsored by the Graduate School. Today's conversation is offered in partnership with the Department of Computer Science. The series was created and developed by a group of alumni volunteers from the Graduate Board of Visitors. My name is Melissa Bostrom, and I am the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School. And I'd like to thank my colleague Angela Eberts, Director of Development, for her partnership in producing this series. To make the most of our focused time together today, I'll address a few logistics up front. We'll begin the conversation with 6 key questions that we ask each of our featured guests. And after that, we'll welcome questions from the audience. If you'd like to speak, you can use the raise hand option accessible through the reactions button in the lower right corner of your Zoom window. This session is being recorded, so if you prefer not to appear in the recording, please keep your video muted and share your questions in the chat. With those details out of the way, I'd like now to introduce Dr. Rong Ge, Q Family Associate Professor of Computer Science and Director of Graduate Studies in the department's PhD program. His research is in the area of theoretical computer science and machine learning. He received his PhD from Princeton University and completed a postdoc at Microsoft Research New England before joining Duke in 2015. Professor Ge, I'll turn things over to you to introduce our special guest today, Dr. Jothy Rosenberg.
Thank you. We indeed have a very special guest today, Jothy Rosenberg, who is the founder and executive chairman at Dover Microsystems. Jothy received his PhD in computer science from Duke and taught in the department for 5 years after graduation. After leaving academia, he went on to found 9 high-tech startups in areas ranging from parallel supercomputers to internet security, with some internet infrastructure, television streaming processors, and special effects equipment startups in between. 2 of his startups had exits over $100 million. Jothy's most recent startup began as a DARPA program to develop a processor virtually immune to cyber attacks, an idea he incubated at Baker Labs. And in 2017, he expanded out as Dover Microsystems, where he was CEO until 2022, when he shifted to executive chairman. The author of several technical books, he has a business book coming out next year called Think Like a Tech Founder, Anecdotes of an Incorrigible Entrepreneur. Jothy leads by the phrase, "Who says I can't?" which is the title of his memoir and the name of his nonprofit foundation, which helps those with disabilities regain their self-esteem, success at athletics. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Jothy Rosenberg back to Duke virtually for today's conversation. Let's get started with our first question. So firstly, Jothy, can you tell us about your background and what was your path to your current role?
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me to this nice event and getting an opportunity to talk about Duke and its relationship to my professional life since then. To try to answer your question, when I finished my PhD in 1983, there was a group of graduate students, Durward Rogers, myself, and Steve Daniel. I like to think of us as the 3 musketeers of graduate students at Duke. But there was an opportunity as we were, close to the, 1983 timeframe, I guess, to get involved with a new entity, which, now has been around for many, many years. But it was called the Microelectronics Center of North Carolina. And so when I finished my PhD, they offered me a job there as a vice president of the software side of their business. And the 3 of us all actually went to work there, but I kept an appointment at Duke at computer science as well. So I was able to teach graduate students at Duke several days a week and also work at the Microelectronics Center. And sort of what happened, how I got from there to being an entrepreneur is that I was working on a research program down at MCNC to build essentially a supercomputer. It was on a single board, but it had 1,000 processors on it, and it was designed to fly on board the space shuttle and do real-time telemetry. When that project got to its conclusion, I was so excited about it, and I thought there was a potential for that to be the basis for a startup. Now, I didn't know the first thing about what that meant and how to do it. I did know that at that time, you weren't really going to be able to do that in North Carolina. So I figured I was going to have to go park myself either in Boston or Silicon Valley to do that. I looked at Boston, and then I saw just the team I needed to kind of join forces with coming together in Palo Alto. So I went out there, and that first startup was called MassPar, which is the short for massively parallel. We built 100 supercomputers over 4 years, and then I moved on beyond that and did 8 more startups after that. So that's how that path got started.
Great. Yeah, so I recognize many of our PhD students in the chat, so I'm sure many of them are interested in your organization. So can you tell us a bit more about your organization and maybe describe a typical day for a PhD level hire?
Sure. So the current startup is, as you heard earlier, called Dover Microsystems, and it's in the cybersecurity space. Unlike most cybersecurity companies, its fundamental main component is down in the hardware. The technology is quite complex. We've always had a few PhDs on the staff, including myself. Usually there's someone in the engineering organization, chief scientist or some title like that, who's leading a team and maybe writing some papers, leading our thought leadership, because it's important if you have such a very high-tech type of startup that you've got the PhD level people who kind of add to the bona fides. So we still have a lot of technical challenges in front of us, even though the company is 5 years old. An example of that is that we have to apply formal methods to verifying that our hardware and software does exactly what they're specified to do and nothing more, nothing less, nothing more. That's actually a tall order, and it's really essentially a branch of mathematics / theoretical computer science to pull that off. But that's an example of why we need PhDs at a company like this.
Yeah, thank you. So my next question would be, what do you see as the value that doctoral training has added to your professional success?
I think it's probably surprising to a lot of people how important my PhD has. Along the way, it's kind of opened doors that I wasn't expecting. So, in general, I think a tech startup needs a CEO at the beginning anyway, they need a CEO who's very technical. And so it turns out it's actually not that uncommon for the initial CEO of these very high tech, sometimes the investors like to call them hard tech, to be the CEO. Now, sometimes what happens is that very technical CEO is in that role for maybe a year and a half. So 18 months, and then they might move into a chief scientist or chief technology officer role as a CEO comes in who's much more sales and marketing oriented. But here's what happens. If you don't have a very technical CEO at the beginning, then every time whoever it is, the CEO, is trying to explain the technology to a prospective customer, a partner, someone like that, where they're really going to push hard on asking questions about the technology, well, then that CEO is going to have to actually bring the CTO along with them everywhere they go. And that's not practical, and that's, expensive. So that's kind of the simplest answer, even though I've made it kind of a long answer, is that hard tech companies need a very technical CEO. And that's exactly what had happened with me. I was the CEO, and sometimes would go into the CTO role. And other times, once I guess I got much more savvy about sales and marketing, I stayed in the CEO role.
Oh, that's great. So you mentioned that you are more savvy about sales and marketing towards the end. So what do you think beyond strong research skills, what other skills, experience, and/or training are important for the success in your field?
Well, okay, so yeah, the PhD and being the CEO of a tech company was great, but that's not all you do. And you have to, as a CEO, you've really got to have a bunch of business skills. So what I had to learn those skills the hard way. And one of the things I tried to do was to learn from people that, came into the company, or actually the first company that I went into, once I'd done that first one in Silicon Valley, the massive apparel one. But then when I moved to Boston after that first one, and so I've done all the others here. And that first company I joined when I got to Boston, I went in as CTO with the explicit plan, both in my mind and also in the board's mind of that company, was to go in as CTO of a company that had an extremely experienced sales and marketing CEO to learn from. And so I spent a lot of time learning that way. It would have been great, however, especially since just down the road, there's a great business school at Duke. Down the road, I mean from computer science, if not necessarily trying to get an MBA at the same time as a PhD, but at least taking, learning some of the skills that I was going to need would have been fantastic. And I think if somebody is in getting a PhD and they have decided at that early stage that they're not going to pursue an academic career, then that's someone that might want to think seriously about trying to get some of those skills down the street at the Fuqua School.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that touched upon my next question, which is, are there any skills, training, or experiences you wish you had had in graduate school to prepare you for your current career path?
I think my answer on that one would be the same as the previous one. It's really, I'll be more specific though. So how do you come up with a go-to-market strategy? That's something I had no idea about. I didn't know what the words meant. I thought it meant, well, there's a market and then you want to go to it.
Yeah, I also don't know what the word is. Can you tell us?
So it basically is saying, what is your value proposition? Where is there a market? And the market has to be defined very narrowly. where is there a market that has a serious problem, which your value proposition is ideally suited to solve. And then once you've determined that, or you think you've determined that, you have to go test it. How do you test it? You're really, at this point, you're really just talking to a lot of people. And you want to come up with a set of questions and criteria. How much do you spend in this particular category? If we solve this problem for you, what would we displace? Okay, so now you want to try to turn that into what we call a lighthouse customer. Make almost any deal you can to get them to be a customer who wants to start really using your product. Work with them really closely, make sure that you are incorporating their feedback into modifications of the product, and then go test that with others in the market to make sure that your lighthouse customer isn't a one-off. I'm kind of going into a little bit of detail, but all I want to try to convey is that go-to-market is not simple. And yet, no company that I know of is successful without having established a go-to-market strategy that they execute as they go into the market. And even though I have a lot of experience coming up with a go-to-market strategy, it's kind of like you're never really perfect at hiring either. You're going to make mistakes. And Dover is an example of somewhere where I had a pretty certain sense that we had a good go-to-market strategy and that we had a lighthouse customer. In fact, that lighthouse customer paid us $1.5 million. And yet that customer never shipped their product with ours in it. And ultimately, I decided that go-to-market strategy we'd worked hard on was incorrect. And that instead of going after the commercial market, I needed to completely turn the company around 180 degrees and focus on the government market. And to do that, I had to lay every single person in the company off, except for myself, and start over. So go-to-market strategy is super, super important.
I see. We got some questions from the chat, but let me first finish the last question in the subject question. So the last question is, what can students who would like to work in this field or explore it further do to prepare themselves?
Well, so I'll say this, that a theme of all the books I've written, which is now up to 6, but not including the children's book, but all the other books are books that came about because I was doing something that I needed a book to help guide me. And such a book didn't exist. And so I learned that area and thoroughly, and then wrote the book I wish I'd had. And I'm doing that again, and that's at the risk of being a little self-promoting. This book that's coming out next quarter in Q1 is called Think Like a Tech Founder. And then the subtitle is Anecdotes of an Incorrigible Entrepreneur. After about startup 5, I stopped calling myself a serial entrepreneur and decided that I was an incorrigible entrepreneur. And what's different about it from other books, and that as I've shared this with people and sort of tested it, is that I'm writing down the unvarnished truth of big mistakes that I've made. And it's the mistakes that are the best lessons for people who are going to be trying to found their own company or lead their own company. And I'm also going to go around, talking about it. Maybe I'll get invited to come give a talk from it at Duke. That would be a lot of fun.
Yes, that would be great. And learning the mistakes are really important lessons for anyone who is interested. So now, as I mentioned, we have some questions from audience. So first we have a question from Lexi Bounce. If you could go back, would you do an MBA or other formal training, such as an internship or job in tech transfer after your PhD? Or do you think less formal training, for example, taking courses rather than a fall program, is enough and the rest you can learn on the job? I'm curious how much of industry specifies specific needs to be learned while actually in the industry.
So I got the first part of that, and for sure, and I may not have heard clearly the second part, but let me answer that. So I guess knowing what I know now, what really would have been cool if it was offered, you know how you can get an MD, PhD, and it doesn't take quite as long as getting an MD and a PhD in serial. It takes less time, and you kind of intermix them. So a PhD, MBA combined, I would have done. However, I don't think I would have done getting a PhD and then start again and start getting an MBA. So the next best thing to a combined degree, to combine 2 degrees, probably to me would have been what I mentioned in the questions. Take a few really focused classes. How do you establish a go-to-market strategy? How do you go about, teach them about financing? What do the terms and deals mean? And what is, what things should you watch out for? Should you be afraid of dilution when you do a financing and things like that? So, this is answering the question, would I have gone back and gotten an MBA? And I think I've answered that, but I'm not sure I answered the other part.
Yeah, so I think the second half is more asking how much of what you talked about can be learned in school versus how much of that you actually need to learn while you are on the job.
Referring to the book?
Referring to the skills like go-to-market strategies and everything that you have talked about.
I see. Okay. Fair enough. So I would say 80 to 90% of what I do and speak about every day is not related to my training in computer science as a PhD. It's very much weighted in the direction of more of the MBA type of things. Having said that, every so often I need to go back down into the details, the computer science of what we're doing, and I consciously make sure I get a chance to do that a few times a year, where I'll dive into doing some analysis of something that we're doing, something that's a problem that we're having trouble solving. I'll dive into that myself, maybe working with some members of the team. So I never want to sort of lose that ability to go down and be, technical. But I think on a daily basis, to be really honest, it's either it's 10 or 20% is that, that computer science stuff.
Thank you. Lexi, I hope this answers your question. So let's move on to the next question by Yudong Sun. So the question was, what are the challenges for pitching hard tech startups, presumably more capital intensive and longer time before seeing a return for investors? And how would you recommend to circumvent that?
So, yeah, so there's a real pro and con to hard tech. The pro is that, or the pros are that they tend to be easier to protect with patents, and therefore build what I call a moat. Like, think of a castle with a moat around it. That moat is made up of a bunch of patents, keeps people from attacking you. Secondly, for most hard tech products, the profit margins tend to be higher than for other things. Certainly, compare it to sort of the far extreme would be like a software-based SaaS solution. So that's going to be something that's fast to market, but may not have nearly the kinds of returns that you're going to get out of hard tech. So the downside of hard tech is that it typically is going to take a lot longer to get to market. But there are a lot of things that are very valuable that take a long time to get to market. Almost all biotech firms that start up as a startup and take a very long time. Even if it doesn't take them a long time to come up with that first drug or treatment or whatever it is, but then they got to go through FDA approvals, which takes a really long time. So we're not much different than that. The question is, can you find investors that understand and like the hard tech types of things? And there are several. I mean, there's one here in town that's basically, created by MIT called The Engine. MIT is, they name things in a very unique way, but anyway, so it's called The Engine, and all they invest in is they want to be first money in to hard tech. You don't have to be from MIT to get their money. I also found another investor here in Boston that specializes in hard tech. And one of the things it means, if they specialize in hard tech, is that they're going to stay with it for a long time, even if it takes 5 years, 7 years. There are other investors where the clock that is sort of always ticking on a fund is like 7 years. If you try to go past 7 years with some of these investors' funds, they don't want to do that because they've made a commitment to their LPs, their limited partners, that they're going to basically get the returns, whatever they are, good or bad, and close everything down in 7 years. And so that LP is sort of freed up and can invest their money in new things. Otherwise, their money is committed and it's sort of stuck. So hard tech people tend to make that window or that length of time longer.
Thank you so much for that answer, Jothy. We do have time for one more question from the audience, if anyone has a question. It looks like we've got one question from your colleague from graduate school. Who do you talk to find out if your idea is good?
They're all great questions. I like this question a lot. So you're going to have to test an idea out with a lot of people, actually. First of all, you're going to want to find, if you have an idea, well, it came out of your own personal experiences. So chances are, know there's a problem in the world and that you've just proposed a solution to it. So where is that problem? What market is it in? And go talk to the people that are in that market, and test your idea against them. Let's assume that goes well. You have to also make sure you can get, investors for it. And maybe your idea is too radical. Knowing Durward, it's probably too radical for some investors. But there's almost always angels that will fund things at the early stage based on your credentials, your experiences, and these are risk takers. One of the things I talk about in this book is how to raise money from angels. At one point during the pandemic, when things shut down from all institutional investors, I had no choice but to raise money from angels. And I ended up raising $4.1 million from 82 separate individuals to keep the company going. So I describe how I did that and how I managed to do it without pulling out all of the hair in my head. It wasn't easy. So, that's the best, that's the best answer I've got, Derwin, is just talk to people.
That seems like a wonderful answer. And I think today's conversation has been a great example of the value of talking to people and getting their insights and opinions. So I want to thank the audience for the terrific questions that you've shared today. And it's been such a delight to feature Dr. Jothy Rosenberg in this conversation. I want to especially thank Dr. Rosenberg for his service as our interviewer and interlocutor today. We're looking forward to future offerings in this series, and we hope our audience members will join us for upcoming conversations with senior leaders reflecting on the value of their Duke education. Good day, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.